Live. Well, today we have a very special guest. Today we have Mr. Jim Nitterauer, a Director of Information Security with Graylog Incorporated. He leads the IT services and security compliance teams at Graylog. He has over 25 years of experience. He holds multiple certifications and is a passionate advocate for security policy, development, and implementation. He frequently presents at security conferences, so if you don't see him here, you probably see him somewhere else. Also, please remember after this that you turn in your passports that are stamped to turn in for the raffle. The floor is yours,
That's
sir.
much more important than listening to my talk. Get your passport stamped through the raffle. All right, so here we go. Today's talk is, my name is Jim Nitterauer. I'm with Graylog. I'm the Director of Information Security there. Our talk today is increased power to the shields, proactive hardening to prevent reactive chaos. So have to have this disclaimer in there. I'm not going to read it out loud, but you can see it. It's in there. It's on the camera, so we're good. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about what is the problem. And the problem statement that I'm going to make is we have an over-reliance on our security operations centers and people monitoring logs for signs of compromise, okay? And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. We rely on that as one of our main security strategies. One of the solutions that we're going to talk about today is enhanced proactive hardening and how we can reduce or almost eliminate our risk profile in a lot of areas. We're going to look at some key strategies for doing that. We're going to look at some tools and techniques that we use at Graylog and some of the metrics that we use to measure our success in those areas. And then we'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end. So first, we'll set the stage. You've been appointed a captain of a ship. You're going to be setting sail through some pretty rough waters. These waters have a lot of pirates. They have some unknown viruses in them. You're going to be getting close to the island of the dark web. You have to have your stuff in order before you can set sail. And you're going to be given a choice here. You're going to get to choose the vessel that you're going to take on this journey. First choice of your vessel here, this is the newest class of destroyers in the U.S. Navy. This thing has all of the electronic warfare sensitivity, has all of the defenses to be able to defend itself through the roughest waters. So it knows what's happening, and it's probably the most secure ship out there. The other choice is you can go with this older version of a ship. This is, in case you don't know, this is Ironside's. Ship's over 200 years old. It's been around for quite a while. It's lasted. It's weathered the storm. Still sits up in Boston Harbor. You can go visit it yourself if you're up there. It's got a crew that knows how to sail a tall ship like it's nobody's business. But can they protect themselves when they're sailing through modern-day waters with modern-day threats? The choice is yours, right? What do you want to do? Which ship do you want to be the captain of? If you're in information security, if you're a security leader, a CISO, you have to choose what ship you're taking sail through the waters. And I use the word ship because your business is like a ship. You're sailing it through the waters of the world to make a profit for your company. So the problem, my statement here, is that we have an over-reliance on post-attack analytics. We have siloed roles in engineering, development, IT security, and other areas. Cross-team collaboration is minimal. People don't know what's going on. Security doesn't necessarily participate in the design phases of things when they're being built. How many of you have gone through a process where a new feature is rolled out in some software that your company supports and you go, oh shit, how did that get past security? That's never going to fly. Were you involved in that process during the threat modeling? Were you involved in the engineering phases and bringing that to market? No. Now you've got this feature that users expect to work, and you've got to go back and patch it after the fact. Threat modeling isn't used very much. Little attention is given to security quality. I don't know if anybody heard Jen Easterly's talk at Black Hat. What did she say about vulnerabilities in software? She said they're not vulnerabilities in software. They're product defects. They're defects that were not built correctly within the software. People say, oh, they're vulnerabilities. The hacker's going to exploit them. No, they're not. The tires on your car aren't round. You can't drive that car, right? Same idea. The whole idea here is that we have to change our focus as security leaders to look at how we can secure things before they reach the production level. And unfortunately in the world, the focus from product management and everyone else is they're focusing on speed to deployment. How quickly can we get this new feature out? How quickly can we meet this deadline? How quickly can we meet our sales deadlines? At reduced time to market, it kills us. One of the other problems we have is dashboard dizziness. Now I'm using Graylog here. I work for Graylog. I love Graylog. It's a great tool, great SIM product. But if we're relying on a product like this to be our first line of defense and security by looking at logs, alerts, and analytics, we've already lost, right? What's the term, everybody know what the term dwell time means? So how long has an adversary been in your network before you detected their presence? And we're gonna look at some statistics here in a minute. What ideally should the dwell time be? Should it be measured in days? It should be measured in minutes or seconds, right? And we aren't there yet. And we aren't there yet because we aren't doing our jobs correctly when we're rolling out things into our environments. The other problem here, we're talking about dwell times. Here's some statistics. According to Mandate, the average dwell time in an environment has decreased over time. That's good. 2018, 78 days. 2022, 16 days. 2023, 10 days. I pose the question, what's the ideal dwell time? None. And adversaries should not be in your environment for any longer than necessary. Saying that I caught them after 48 days, I would be like, you didn't do your job for 48 days. You left a hole in your environment that let somebody in the door for 48 days. Would you live in an apartment with rats for 48 days? Probably not. You'd do something about it. If you had roaches in your house, you wouldn't wait 48 days to do something about the roaches. You would do something now. How is what we do in cybersecurity any different? All right. The other issue we're dealing with is SOC analyst burnout. This is some Forbes statistics. In 2022, 71% experienced burnout. 64% spent 50% or more of their time working on manual work. That means physically looking at logs, physically doing things to figure out whether those logs had any meaning. 69% of the SOCs are understaffed, 60% have increased workloads, and 64% are likely to switch their jobs in the next year. So the other issue that we deal with is increased threat profile. According to CrowdStrike, we've had 230 plus new adversaries. We have the fastest recorded e-crime breakout time of 2 minutes and 7 seconds. That means that from the time the malicious actor was detected by CrowdStrike, that they saw them in action in somebody's network doing malicious activity. 75% increase in cloud intrusions, 76% spike in data theft, and 75% of the attacks were malware attacks. Unfortunately, we're doing a lot to prevent malware attacks, but I was at a talk just before this, Jason Haddock's talk, and he talked about the easiest way that hackers gain access to a network or to your resources. And was anybody else at that talk? What's the main way? Stealing credentials. They're still stealing credentials. We have the tools today to stop people from ever gaining access to any of our assets. With those tools, we're not using it, and we're still seeing 86% of the attacks coming from the fact that people gain access to credentials. So, our reactive approach is focused on fixing issues after they've happened, and I equate this to taking our ship out to sail. It's like waiting. We're going to sail blindly across the sea. Once the torpedo hits, we're going to look at the logs to see who fired the torpedo, assess the damage while the ship's sinking. That's exactly what SOC analysts do, right? They're looking at, and I'm not playing down what they do. They do their work is hard, it's difficult, and unfortunately, from the sea level, we've made that work even tougher for them than what it needs to be. And what we're looking at here is reactive approaches lead to downtime, financial loss, and we become less effective dealing with malicious attacks as the attacks become more sophisticated. So, one solution. This is a solution that I propose. This is the way I run our IT infrastructure. I believe that security and IT should be joined at the hip. If they're not joined at the hip in your company, your security program is going to fail. I guarantee it. Right? If you've got an IT department that doesn't talk to security and they roll out stuff without security approval or without security being involved in how they do their day-to-day activity, you're going to diverge in a path that you'll never be able to recover from. I guarantee it. I've seen it. I've been in other companies. I've been in other businesses, and it happens. So, how do we increase the power to the shields? Well, We've got the tools now to deal with what I call proactive hardening. And basically what proactive hardening means is we're reducing the attack surface so that the malicious actors don't have the ways into our networks and our assets. So it involves identifying and fixing vulnerabilities. It involves changing default settings, removing unwanted services, unpopularly limiting what software users can put on their machines, right? Those sorts of things. But the overall process has to start somewhere. And this is a great guide here. You get a chance, write that link down, take a picture of it. That is an awesome guide on how to start this process. Put out by Mandiant. So what are the benefits of doing this? Well, first it gives us the ability to limit the attack surface, but it also gets rid of unnecessary services. So many services on Windows or Linux machines are creating logs. Those logs are going into our SIM. Our SOC operators have to sort through those logs and create rules to determine whether those logs are valid or whether those logs are meaningless background noise. If we can eliminate services we don't need, we're lowering the load on those SOC analysts right from the get-go. The other thing we can do is we can minimize vulnerabilities and protect against potential exploits. That's pretty obvious. Additionally, system hardening streamlines our compliance and auditing processes. We've got compliance ass backwards, in my opinion, in the world. We go through compliance to produce a piece of paper that we give to another business that says we did all the right things. Yet we're doing all the right things the wrong way, right? We're still having breaches. We're still having things compromised. We're still having data losses. If compliance were doing what it was supposed to do, the numbers of those things would be going down, but they're not. And the last thing here is reduces the complexity of our IT environment. You may say, well, how does it do that? And we'll look at that a little bit more in detail as we go through this process. And ultimately, reducing the attack surface is a way to limit the abnormal events that are sent to your SIM, reduces the number of logs that a SOC analyst has to look at, and therefore gives them more time to spend looking for those things that have higher value and higher meaning. So what are the key strategies for doing this? This is how we approached it. Now, I'm going to look at this from a system point of view. So a system has a scope. It's not your entire organization. You can't attack your entire organization and get this done at one time. What you have to do is pick the high-value targets. What are the things in my business that have the highest risk? What are the things that generate the most revenue for the company? What are the things that keep the company moving forward the fastest? And typically, those are going to be production systems and your IT infrastructure. So the concepts here are to look at configurations, applications, software, the operating systems, and your physical, your networks, your data centers, all of those sorts of things, your offices. A lot of times, people are overlooked in security. And as a security practitioner, you should be, if somebody asks you the question, what's my highest priority in security? What's the first word that come out of your mouth? People, right? All this other stuff doesn't matter. If the whole business burned down and everybody was saved, that's a win, right? People matter more than all of this other stuff. But everybody forgets that people are very high value to the business and need to have security protection as well. So from proactive hardening, what do? First, we identify our inventory and assets. How many people inventory all their assets in their networks? All of their computers, all of their endpoints, all of their cloud services, right? Everything. I'm not talking about just physical assets, but software. How about browser plugins that are installed by your users that you don't know about? Okay, things like that have to be inventoried. You have to monitor them, and you have to know what's going on in your environment. First, you identify the assets. Then you check those assets to see what vulnerabilities are within those assets. Some of them you may not know. The assets may not be well known enough to where anybody's putting in any kind of vulnerabilities for them. But if you know that the vulnerabilities are there, you can then work to prioritize the risk and start to mitigate those vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities are not always mitigated through patching. They can be mitigated through changing configurations. They can be mitigated through changing what that particular service or what that particular function does, what it's allowed to do. There's a whole lot of different ways that you can change your setup to make things less likely to be exploited. And people always think, well, I'm patching. Now, patching is really only a subset of hardening your networks. Patching we should be doing, patching should be automated, patching shouldn't be a problem. Yet it still is in organizations, but patching is only a very small subset of what we're doing here. So let's start looking at some of the tools and techniques. One of the things that we do is I break this down into areas, and I'm going to focus solely on our IT infrastructure, but you could apply this to, for example, Graylog has a cloud-based service, so we're AWS-based cloud service. That's a whole other area, a whole other scope, a whole other system that we could apply this to, which we will next. But right now, I want to just talk about one area so we can kind of see from a smaller scope within a business. The first thing we do is inventory management. You can't secure or protect what you don't know is there, right? You've heard the whole term shadow IT. Well, what does that mean? That means, well, there's stuff on my network, stuff that has access to company assets that I don't know about, I don't control, and I can't figure out what the security posture of those devices is. Well, COVID created a big mess with all of this, right? Everybody goes home now with their computers or laptops. They're connecting to their home network. They've got televisions, their own Wi-Fi system, the kids' computers on that same network. You don't know what IoT devices are on their networks at home that could be influencing the device that you as a company owns that's on that network. So now it makes the job a little bit harder. The second thing we have to inventory is our user management. Who's accessing our systems? What permissions do they have? So that would be authentication, which means do they have the right to be in our system? And then authorization. Once they're in the door, what things within our systems do they have access to do? What can they do? And they're two separate things. They're not both the same. Just because somebody has authorization doesn't mean that they have because they have authentication doesn't mean they have authorization to do everything. The next thing we look at is configuration management. We look at how those devices that we're looking at, in our case, we're looking at Windows machines, Macs, and a few people have laptops that run Linux. We look at the configuration management of those devices, and we look for consistency. What are the things that we need to do to make those devices hardened to the point where they meet our minimum baseline standard to be on the network? Next thing we look at is software distribution. I'm a firm believer that users get the tools they need to do their job, and they don't get anything else on their corporate laptop. And I'm not doing that to be hard. I'm doing that because every time your company makes an exception to allow somebody to install some other piece of software on your corporate asset, that's another vulnerability you have to track, another weakness, another thing that you have to be responsible for on your network. So you have to think hard and fast about giving people access to things because they feel like they need it or because they want it. You have to give them the tools that they need to get their job done. And I'll tell you how we do all this later. Oop, I can't go back. Can you go back one slide, please? This doesn't give me the option to go back. Yep, there we go. So patching, automating the mundane tasks of keeping our systems updated. This includes operating systems, software, everything else. In this day and age, there's absolutely no excuse for a company to not be patching on a consistent basis and to have their patching up to date with the current patch levels for every operating system within 30 days. I had people say, oh, well, it's going to break something. Well, if it breaks something, you got to figure out why it's breaking and get yourself patched. You got to take that, it goes back to we're making defective software. If we can't make our software run on a current operating system that's secure, then we have a problem. And we have to go back and fix those things. Data flow, this is a big one that people don't get. How many of you have a data management policy? You know, your SOC 2 requires that you have a data classification policy, right? Everybody has one. How many of you are actually enforcing data classification through marking of documents, marking of files, and constraining the range that that data has within your organization? If somebody in your organization clicks on a OneDrive file and sends it out via email and it contains proprietary information to an outside third party that should be confidential and it goes out, isn't that violating your data classification policy? What kinds of rules do you have in place to keep that data in where it needs to be? And you might not think it matters, but there's a couple of companies out there that do web scans for files that link back to your domain or your email addresses, And you'd be surprised based on your domain, what's out there, what's gotten loose from your network. You think, oh, well, our sales guy only sent this to that guy. Well, that guy says, oh, hey, I know a bunch of people. This is the quote I got from Graylog. What did you get from Graylog? Suddenly it's out there in the world, and everything that's supposed to be a confidential piece of information is floating around on the open internet. And the last thing you have to do is monitor and track your progress. So, this approach is evolving with how we're building things. I came on the company 2.5 years ago. It was Wild West. The way the company was bringing on users, they'd say, go to Best Buy, buy a computer, install Windows, get a Mac at the Apple store, and away you go. We're working, we're making money. It's all well and good when you're 15, 20 people, but ultimately you have to fix that problem. So this process is not something you're going to do overnight. It's taken us about 2 years, 2.5 years to get this implemented. We still have a lot that we want to do, but what you have to do is you have to figure out where your quick wins are in this process. You have to deal with objections by focusing on the benefits. I'm an old guy, and in this day and age, you've got a lot of people who get all uptight because their feelings get hurt about things. And I'll tell you straight up, the business doesn't care about your feelings. The business cares about reporting to the stockholders and the board of directors that they're making a profit. And employees at a company have to get over that very quickly. And unfortunately, we are at a point where we're afraid to offend people by telling them no, they can't have the candy they want, right? And we can't do that and secure things the right way. We're not trying to be jerks about it. We want to give them the tools they need to do their job. We want to keep them happy as we can. We want to give them good laptops. We want to give them the best tools possible. But at the same time, we have to balance the risk to the business, and we have to balance our time. We can't manage everyone's feelings. We have to manage what the outcome is for the business. And remember, it's far less costly to implement a solid, proactive program today than it would be to deal with a serious breach later. All right, so first step, now I want to break these out into a little more details about how we did this. So inventorying all the things. We have end users with laptops. They have Windows, Macs, and Linux machines. Every machine comes into our company. We purchase it from a particular vendor who set us up in the autopilot program for Microsoft. No machine joins our network unless it's autopilot joined, period. Right? If there's some third-party device that needs to be on there, we will make it join through autopilot. So people brought, for example, they brought their own Surface Pros. We didn't buy them, but we were able to import them and put them in our autopilot program to allow the configurations, remote wiping, and all of the things that we do with those machines. Now, all of our employees are mostly remote. We have an office here in Houston, but we have employees all over the world. We have about 150 employees. We implemented Azure AD through, used to be called, what was it before? Now it's Entra ID. They keep changing the name of these things, and I can't keep up with them. But it's Entra ID now. So every user is brought on with Entra ID. Now, the beauty of this process is I send G, works for me, I send G his new laptop. G gets a new laptop that's autopilot joined. I call him up on the day he starts. We set up his Azure AD account. He logs into that laptop with that Azure AD account. It downloads all the software he needs. It pushes all the policies to that machine. It sets all the configurations, does all the hardening. Within 15 minutes, he's up and running. There's no 4 hours of download this from this website, download this from that website. The machine is set to go. And we can determine what goes out to each machine by the AD group that that particular user is in. We also force EDR to be pushed out. We use 2 EDRs. It may seem weird, but we do. We use Defender for Endpoint. Why Defender for Endpoint? Well, it works. Microsoft and CrowdStrike by far have the most telemetry of anybody in the world. Nobody's going to beat them. There's no other EDR that can come close. But the nice thing about Defender for Endpoint, how many of you use another vulnerability scanner besides CrowdStrike or Defender? Okay. So how would you like to save a little money? Have everything in the same portal. For minimal dollars, there's a Defender for Endpoint vulnerability management add-on that allowed us to drop our Tenable subscription completely. Saved us $7,000 a year. Nothing wrong with Tenable, it's a great platform. But this had it built into a single pane of glass that alerts me to any vulnerabilities that are in our machines. The nice thing I found out was that we were able to not only find vulnerabilities on the operating systems, it scanned every machine for every piece of software that was on it. Browsers, drivers, browser plugins, installed software, and told me all the vulnerabilities across every machine. Then it also went and said, oh, on G's network at home, there's a TV and a router and this thing on his network. It showed me all the IoT devices that were there. And it would alert me to any one of those that was risky on his network. And he lives in New Jersey, I live in Florida. And I see what's going on. Will I do anything about it? That just depends on the alerts that come up. But I say that because I'm not trying to get you to drop one thing or another, but I'm saying if you can compile or compress all of your things into one system and use all of the features of that system instead of buying 15 different things to do the 15 things that this already does for you, you're going to be better off. So, inventorying all the things includes the software assets, the browser plugins, like I said, the IoT devices. It also checks USB installed devices. So it'll find my Jabra speaker that's connected to my USB port on my computer when I'm sitting at home. Things like that that you might never think about being connected to your network. And it also looks for other installed hardware that may be installed outside of the realm of what you sent them when you sent them the device. So that deals with the physical assets. That's all done through Entra ID, and then when the Defender for Endpoint is added, there's a security portal that Microsoft has, and I'll show you a few screenshots about that a little bit later. And any of this stuff, if you want to talk to me about it later, I'll be around here the rest of the day and be happy to give you more details into what we do. I just can't show it on the screen. All right, so we manage all the users. All corporate users get an Azure AD credential. Excuse me. That standardizes their login. We use that login for almost everything that we do. We enforce multi-factor authentication from day one. When you log in on your computer, first time you get your autopilot joined computer, you log in and the next step is, hey, Graylog needs some more information from you. Whip out your phone, it tells them what to do. Download the Authenticator app, sets up the Authenticator, and sets up another way for them to get in. We also distribute UBI keys for everyone who uses hardware factor. You cannot get into any asset in our network without a second factor, period. Now, that's one thing people go, why are we still having 86% of all of our breaches happening because credentials get hacked? Why? It's simple. You turn on two-factor authentication, you enforce it, and you make it happen. It may not cover every aspect, and there's for sure ways people can get around it, but it certainly will reduce that 86% down to next to nothing for your organization. All critical systems that support SSO are configured through Entra ID. So, it doesn't seem like much, right? Think about all the third-party apps that you use. Zoom, Teams, I don't know, maybe you use HubSpot, maybe you use some other applications. Don't you hate having to log into every one of those and go to manage those users? We don't do that. When the user joins, they're put in certain groups automatically. When they sign in, the minute they sign in with their credentials and they're authenticated, their machine then passes what's called a configuration profile compliance to a configuration profile. Once that machine passes that compliance configuration, they're granted access to everything they need to do their job. Zoom users are provisioned automatically. HubSpot users are provisioned automatically. Where we can, we use what's called SCIM. It stands for System Cross Domain Identity Management, and it's used to create roles within other systems that correspond to roles within your Active Directory. So by doing that, we don't touch those other systems. What's the beauty of that? Well, let's say G decides to leave the company tomorrow. Please don't leave, G, don't leave. But he decides to leave tomorrow. Now I have to offboard him. Do I want to go to 15 different platforms and have to deal with turning off all those logins? No. We simply know G's off at 4:30 in the afternoon. We go in and click a button, and there's a button in the Azure portal that allows you to just flush all of their authentications, and they're off of every system that we have linked to single sign-on. We're not worried about it. The other thing this provides for us when we manage the users, it provides us the ability to do software distribution and application access based on the root membership. So remember I was telling you manage the software. Well, in Endpoint Manager, which is now, used to be called Intune, but it's now called Endpoint Manager, you have the ability to set up applications for users to install by choice or to force install on their machines. I would highly recommend that you do this for every application. Why? Now, I'm sure that your users, when they're downloading their applications from the internet, download the application and download the MD5 hash or check some of that file and check it against that file before they install it on their machine, right? Everybody does that, right? No, not at all. They don't. All they have to do is get one file from a bad location, right? Get fished on their search and download, let's say they're downloading putty or something like that, something they need, but they get the wrong one. Now you've got a whole other can of worms to deal with. So this gives us the ability to push that software out to be sure that we're pushing valid software. In some cases, the new Microsoft Store has quite a large array of software already in there that they can install on devices on your behalf, one of them being Firefox. If you use Firefox, use the Microsoft Store to install Firefox and it will stay up to date 100% of the time, always. You won't have to worry about it. There's other software in that store like that. The things that are in there are growing over time. And again, we can disable, we have a single point to disable corporate access when somebody leaves the company. All right, so managing all the users, the last thing we can do is we can track their logins. We can look to see if somebody's logging in from 2 different places in the world that are physically impossible. Did they use a VPN? Did they not? Right, all of that is in alerts that come to us. We have robust sign-in logs so we can see if somebody's compromised. And we can enforce compliance policies by user, by user and by device so that we can determine what level of access and what things users can get into based on their device and their AD group. We can also do these self-service features, which if anybody had the CrowdStrike issue come up and, they had the CrowdStrike issue come up, what was the one thing that was the slow point in getting that recovery done? Getting your BitLocker recovery keys. If you had an on-prem AD controller, you were screwed because that's the only place you can get those BitLocker recovery keys, right? You had to recover those AD controllers first, get your system admin access to that, then they had to go one by one and give that data out to everybody. Well, then if you put that out in Slack or some other means of communication, now that BitLocker key is out there, once that person's back on, you got to rotate the keys. Microsoft gives you the ability to turn on self-service for these keys. In our case, we had 2 devices that got locked because they didn't listen. They turned their device off in the middle of the whole thing. If you left the device on, it would fix itself and get better and you wouldn't have the problem. So we had to get the BitLocker recovery keys. Well, they were able to get those keys themselves just by clicking on a link on the blue screen that took them to the website or told them what website to go to on their phone to get the recovery key. Very easy to do. They can also reset their passwords, and they can also request application access if they need it to certain applications within the organization. All self-service. Now, you can set approvals for, you don't give them carte blanche to say, I want this application, and they get it. You just say, I request this. It comes up, you get an administrator notice, and you can approve or disapprove their ability to get that. The other cool thing it does is it gives us the ability to have what's called cross-tenant access. So in our case, we use an outside SOC. We're a small company, so we contract that out to somebody else. That SOC has another tenant in Azure, AD, Entra ID, whatever you want to call it, and we just give them cross-tenant access with certain read privileges so they can go in and do certain things in our tenant to look at logs, look at different information that's within our systems, but they don't have access to do anything other than what we give them. Very convenient, and then they can manage their own users without us having to do it for them. All right, so this next part we're going to look at manage all the configurations. I got 10 minutes here, so we should get through. When a device joins Active Directory, we push a bunch of different standard configurations, compliance policies, and other things. So we set up the configuration of their antivirus, of their EDR, a whole lot of different things that are recommended to us through some other channels that I'll show you here in just a second. Much like group policy, but it's cloud-based. We don't have to worry about it. We can do it from anywhere in the world. And we also set up autopilot profiles, which gives us the ability to remote wipe the machine, reset the machine, do all kinds of things. So, somebody calls us up and says, oh, my machine got stolen. Well, chances are somebody's not going to get into the machine, but if they do, we simply go and click a button and say, the next time that machine calls home, wipe it, it's done. The brick, you can use it for whatever you want. I don't care. Put Windows back on it, do what you want. We lost the machine, but we didn't lose any data. And it also pushes out security baselines. So before a machine can join any certain asset, the machine has to meet a minimum standard of security before we'll allow it to do that. We're also able to inventory unmanaged devices. We already talked about that. And we're able to set the configuration settings on Windows firewalls. We're able to set network setting configurations. There's web filtering built into these settings. The EDR settings are in there. And disk encryption. We can set our BitLocker. Excuse me, I don't know why I'm coughing so much today. We can set all of our BitLocker encryption parameters and force BitLocker encryption on disks. And set up conditional access profiles. All right. So the last part here is we harden all the devices by using the Microsoft Security Portal, and they have something in there called Secure Score. Remember I said you put Defender for Endpoint on there. Defender for Endpoint does the vulnerability scores, plus it also does a bunch of other scans looking at the configuration of pretty much everything in Windows. And it gives you a list, and I'll show you this list in a second, of all the things you can do to increase your security score. Now, your security score is an overall secure broken down into 4 areas. Deals with data, identity, applications, and devices. In those 4 areas, you can get up to 100% score on those areas. And what those change over time because new things become available, new vulnerabilities are figured out, better configuration policies or better configuration settings are figured out by Microsoft, and they push all of that along to their customers. And all of these things are set through policies, configuration profiles, security baselines, and it tells you how to implement the best practices. It also tells you how to set the right settings in Exchange Online, your Office Suite, Teams, and it provides granular recommendations for reducing your exposure. And we already talked about the vulnerability management add-on. The other part we can do, obviously, is we talked about deploying software and leveraging the Microsoft Store to do that. We can deploy software automatically on all these machines. We can run cleanup scripts. We can run PowerShell scripts, bash scripts, whatever we want. One of the other cool things that I did not put in here is that if there's an issue with somebody's machine and you want to go in and do certain things and you're good with PowerShell, for example, you can write a PowerShell script to a remote session of that person's machine anywhere in the world, push that PowerShell script to a library and run it remotely on the machine. So for example, one of the ones that we do, somebody brings a machine onto our network, they can't get on to do things because they don't meet the configuration profile standards, but they'll still join, they'll still have EDR on there and I can do a remote session. So I'll go and I'll run a script that will pull their autopilot ID. It's a hash that comes from the hardware that's calculated. I can pull that file remotely, load that file, import it into our autopilot settings, and then the machine suddenly gets past the limitations and becomes part of our organization. We can run remediations, we can look at error logs, we can do all kinds of things remotely through that. And here, patching is something that, for me, I don't consider patching a problem. A lot of people complain about it. They say, oh, I can never keep up. I worked at a previous organization where the IT director, it wasn't me, was always complaining about how hard it was to keep up. Well, what we do is we set up AutoPatch. AutoPatch sets up rings of patching for your devices, and it automatically pushes those patches to the devices on the schedule that you set. You can set them how long it takes to get there, how long a delay time there is. We typically look at about 4 days. Once Microsoft pushes out a patch, we'll run it to the first ring the end of the week. Because by then we'll know if there's something really bad, right? And then by the end of the next week, all the patches are pushed and everything's up to date. But you can limit what you do as far as versioning of Windows. So whether it's 23, 22, whatever version, Enterprise, Pro, to do all of these things, you have to push Enterprise, and if you have a E5 license, you get Enterprise for free as part of your, well, not free, but it's part of your licensing. So when a machine joins, it's automatically upgraded to the Enterprise version. And the quarterly updates get pushed out. The other cool thing is we can push out patches to all the firmware. So all of our devices, 5 minutes, all of the devices are getting information on firmware, and those are getting pushed out. Same thing for Mac, same thing for Linux, same idea. So managing all the data. We configure Microsoft Purview to be our compliance officer, if you will. It will go through and tag everything that's on Exchange, OneDrive, Teams, and any other portal, SharePoint. SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams are all kind of related, so they all fall kind of under the same umbrella. And it will mark those, it'll put sensitivity markings on all that data, and then force that data to remain within those boundaries defined by the sensitivity tags that are on that data. It allows users to override it depending on the policies you set, and it gives you great reporting. So we monitor all the things through these different portals, but these APIs are great for monitoring. Graylog is a SIM, so we are able to take these APIs and import critical data back to our SIM and look at it in a way that gives us a risk score based on each device, based on each user, within a single pane of glass that we can look at. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to go faster. You can read this. This is what I just talked about. We track the metrics over time, so one of the things we look at is how many patches or how many vulnerabilities there are. Are the vulnerabilities increasing or decreasing over time? Are there patches not happening over time? Are people not installing their Mac updates over time? Those sorts of things. And then we have metrics and results. So this is what one of the things that Microsoft shows us here, about 4 minutes. This is a security score. So one of the things you'll notice over on the lower right side says comparison, your score versus organizations of similar size. Microsoft has a lot of data. They look at a lot of organizations that have tenants. You see a problem here? If the average security score for most organizations, the size of 150 employees, is 42, we aren't doing our jobs, right? If you're implementing these tools and you're not taking advantage of all of the configuration options you have in here to raise your security score, and then you're going to your board and your executives and saying, I need more budget to do these things, I would say go back and use the tools you have to harden your networks, to harden your assets, to push out your configuration profiles, and to move things in a manner that you're raising that security score. And then if we need to raise it more and there's still a risk, maybe we can go back for more money from the well, right? The problem is we get all these tools, we don't figure out how to use them, we think we need another tool to do what the tool we have already does. And that graph just shows you the trend over time. Here's kind of the things that we measure. Our security score over time, we looked at exceptions, regressions. Some things will change, this will jump up and down. That score goes between 99 and 96, depending on when new devices come in. Jumps all over the place. These are the things I was telling you, the recommendations that it gives you for that fine-grained hardening. All of these items, you click on that item, it gives you a whole lot of detail about what you should do to reduce that risk within your organization. Pretty straightforward. Obviously, you have to test it to make sure it doesn't break something, but in most cases, it won't. And then we look at, it gives us insight into all of our devices, all of our identities, what cloud resources, what other discovered devices are out there, and which ones are onboarded. And this is a Graylog input from one of the APIs just showing some things that are happening with Office 365 and some of the things that we can pull from that. So summary, take-home action, we're getting to the end here. All right, so Solid Security Program focuses on proactive hardening and automation. Automate, automate, automate. If you have to do something manually more than once, figure out how to automate it. It's possible. It is. There's no reason to be doing this stuff manually. All right? While SOC operators are critically important to an organization, relying on your SOC as your first line of defense is a fool's game. You're going to lose. You've already been breached. The data's already gone. The reputation's already been hacked. You're going to lose money. Spend your time, energy, and dollars hardening, standardizing, and automating your security program. All right? Choose the right vessel for your journey. Remember, it's easier to protect the ship from the torpedo than it is to keep the ship from sinking after the torpedo strikes. So that's what I have. It's a little bit condensed, but there you go. There's how you can reach me. Yes, sir. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if you were to go dig into this now, the way Endpoint Manager has changed, there's a huge number of recommendations in that list that I showed you that will ramp up your security score pretty dramatically. I mean, you could go from that 40 average to about 70 or 80, maybe with 4 or 5 things that you do that are major. And most of it is because the configuration that Microsoft presents by default isn't secure by default, which is stupid, but that's what it is, okay? Yeah, so those things, you can get some early wins. It's kind of like you're going to do 80% of your work's going to be getting that last 10%, right? But those 10% things are the things that the bad guys are going after, or that you have to really lock down and figure out. So if you follow those steps, you'll kind of get in a rhythm for doing it. What we do is we look at it, we monitor that security score regularly, we look for new changes, and then when we see changes in the Microsoft environment, like from Windows or an Apple, we'll go in and look for what are the things that the bad guys are going after, and is there something we can do to reduce that attack surface? So focus on that high-level risk that's right in front of you, right? And then when you have some spare time, go through and just chip away at those other ones. That's kind of the way we approach it. Yeah, what's the strategy for mergers? The strategy for mergers is talk to your CEO before the merger happens and make sure your security team does their due diligence before, not after the paperwork's been signed. But good luck with that one. I've gone through this with other companies. We did not allow that company to join our network until they met our security standards, bottom line. Because you're just going to unravel everything you've just already done, already worked hard to get this segment of your business at this level. Now you're going to bring in this other unknown and give them access to something that you don't know what their security posture is. So you just have to start onboarding them slowly over time. A hardware refresh or a complete machine wipe and bring them on, whatever it is, you just got to get them into that standard.